Short answer, the Dutch route to Batavia in Indonesia using the strong winds of the roaring forties. The route was devised by the Dutch navigator Hendrik Brouwer in 1611 and gave the Dutch a significant advantage over the Portuguese, as the crossing of the Indian Ocean only took 6 months as opposed to 12 months on the monsoon route. This allowed the Dutch to travel much faster than their Portuguese competitors and circumvent many hostile areas. Aside from the area around the Cape of Good Hope, where the Dutch would establish Cape Town, the Brouwer route was almost entirely oceanic. From the Netherlands, the route would go out into the Atlantic, down past the Iberian Peninsula, and follow the Portuguese route down along the North African coast to the trade winds. It would then follow the trade winds west towards South America to cross over the equatorial doldrums. The route would use the southgoing currents of the western half of the South Atlantic Gyre to cross the southern horse latitudes and go into the westerlies that would bring them over towards South Africa. They would ride the westerlies and the roaring forties currents to Cape Town, where a colony was established for supplies. Until now, the Brouwer route was much like the Portuguese route down to the Cape of Good Hope. The next part would be very different. From the Cape of Good Hope, the Brouwer route would continue due east in the roaring forties along the southern edge of the Indian Oceanic Gyre. This meant that both the winds and the currents would be with the ships, but it would be open ocean and with few landmarks, which was the great risk of this route. The Dutch ships would need to turn up north at the right time or risk shipwrecking on the coast of Western Australia. This would be the fate of the second British ship attempting to copy the route in 1622, which was wrecked off Pilbara coast of Australia. The British then abandoned the route to the Dutch for the following decades, leaving the early exploring of Australia to the Dutch, something still shown in Tasmania being named after the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman. To turn north at the right time on the Brouwer route, sighting of either Amsterdam Island or St. Paul Island was important. The route would then follow the northward flowing eastern current of the Indian Oceanic Gyre up into the trade winds. This would place the ships slightly east of the destination of Batavia, present-day Jakarta, on the island of Java. Thus the ships would go northwest with both the trade winds and the currents of the Indian Oceanic Gyre to reach Java. As Java in Indonesia is south of the equator, the route was fully within the Indian Oceanic Gyre. This had the added bonus that the return trip was simply to set out west with the trade winds and the northern west flowing part of the Indian Oceanic Gyre. When reaching over towards Africa, the route would then follow the south-going part of the Gyre, like the Portuguese monsoon route, to reach the Cape of Good Hope. The route would then have fully circumnavigated the Indian Oceanic Gyre to complete the eastern part of the route. The last part would then be to return up through the Atlantic. This proceeded like other European routes based on the Portuguese original. From the Cape of Good Hope, the route would trail along the northward-going current of the South Atlantic Oceanic Gyre to cross the horse latitudes to go into the trade winds. The trade winds would then be used along with the northern westward current of the South Atlantic Oceanic Gyre to go towards equatorial Brazil. The equatorial doldrums would be crossed to go into the northern trade winds. These would be used along with the southern current of the North Atlantic Oceanic Gyre to go up towards the Caribbean to cross the horse latitudes into the westerlies. The ships would then ride the westerlies along with the northern Azores current of the North Atlantic Oceanic Gyre to cross the Atlantic. To reach more northerly in Europe, the ships would veer off into the North Atlantic current offshot of the Gyre, which would point them towards Britain, France and beyond. They would trail the southern side of the North Atlantic current to aim towards the Channel, or more northerly to go north around Britain into the North Sea and back to the Netherlands. Combined with the journey out, the route back would form an enormous figure 8 in the Atlantic based on the use of both the winds and the oceanic gyres. The Brouwer route would fully utilize no less than 3 oceanic gyres, the North Atlantic, South Atlantic and Indian Oceanic Gyre. It led to the Dutch East India Company being able to complete a round journey to Southeast Asia much faster than their competitors, leading to the company becoming extremely wealthy. Also, the fact that the route was based on only a single halfway stop in Cape Town meant that the company had much lower cost of maintaining ports and supplies along the route. The very long distance travelled between ports was greatly helped by the development of the Dutch fleet. The fleet was developed from the galleon with a similar hull shape and sail plan, but unlike the galleon, it was not made for conversion into a warship and had little armament and crew. It was made for cargo, and it was its long voyage far from land that protected it more than its guns, and with its small crew it could stay at sea long without supplies. The fleet thus made the Brouwer route very effective and limited the need for supply colonies along the route. And this is important, since such colonies were a severe capital drain. Although the age of sail is often associated with large colonial empires like the Spanish in the Americas, it is important to remember that the main objective for the European kingdoms in sailing out across the oceans was not necessarily conquest. It was to bring back wanted goods for the home market. Conquest was only a subplot to this goal and not always a lucrative one. What was truly lucrative was when you could cut out the middlemen of valuable goods and cut down the cost of transport. Essentially, the objective of transport evolution is to reduce the cost in time, distance, and effort between the origin of a good and its end consumer. And this is where the Dutch East India Company really shines. Not only did they manage to circumvent having many supply colonies along their route, by going to the Malay Islands, they came into contact with the Austronesian cultural sphere, which grew the much sought after spices. This meant that the Dutch went directly to the source, and later they even established their own plantations as they expanded in Indonesia. The profits and few costs meant that the Dutch could invest in their cargo fleet, becoming the by far largest shipper of goods in Europe at the time. Not until the Clipper route would a more efficient sea route be found, as it utilized the circumantarctic currents to go around the globe. What the Dutch showed with the Brouwer route was how to fully utilize the oceanic gyres and wind patterns to establish a Phaeacian empire without that much actual land being controlled. It was a true empire of the sea.